Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. Today, I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Kimberly.
You're
My name
welcome.
is PHYLLIS LEAVITT, and I am in Taos, New Mexico. I am a psychotherapist and an author. I've been a psychotherapist for 35 years, treating individuals and families and couples and children. And I recently wrote a book called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis, which is really how can we bring the understandings of human dynamics and family dynamics that we work with in our individual offices and all the things that we know help heal people of poor conditioning or scary experiences or abuse and neglect. How can we bring those understandings and techniques and skills and new paradigms to look at what's going on in the family of America and bring that healing to our whole social and political structure?
Tell me, the family structure, what consists, what is a dysfunctional family defined as?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because I think a lot of what psychology knows isn't really common knowledge. I mean, I think we know that if somebody's beating a child or, cutting someone or calling them horrible names, we know it's abuse. Or if we're feeding one child and not feeding another, we know that that's abuse and neglect. But I think I talk in my book about something that I call high and low tech human relations, because I think we're all into technology and, we don't necessarily talk about the technology of how we get along with each other. So a healthy family, and again, none of us has it down perfectly because we all, have things to learn and we all have some conditioning that we're probably trying to overcome. But in a healthy family, generally, there's a feeling that you're loved, that you're wanted, that you're valued, that you're supported to be your best self, that there's some healthy limits and boundaries so that when people step outside, what's good for each other, that there's some kind of way of reining them back in that's not harmful. It's not that you don't slap somebody because they misspoke or lock them out of the house because they didn't do their homework, or that kind of thing. And one of the big hallmarks of a healthy family is that there's a commitment to deal with conflict and disagreement without violence. And that's a really big one. And that means without verbal violence, without emotional violence, without physical or sexual abuse. And there's a commitment so that there's a feeling of safety. And that's a really big one, because for people to thrive, for people to feel valued and loved, they have to feel safe. And does that mean that, we won't have a moment where we raise our voice or we say something that we wish we hadn't said? Yeah, we're human and that's going to happen. And sometimes we don't deal with conflict that well. But in a healthy family, people come back to the table and they make amends and they try again. And again, this often with two steps forward and one step back. But there's that commitment that we love each other and we really want to treat each other well, and we're willing to take responsibility for ourselves. And those are high tech human relations. And low tech human relations are the opposite. There's not that feeling of love and safe belonging. The boundaries are either there's no boundaries or the boundaries are rigid. There's usually one or two people that are in power, and everybody else has to submit and obey. And if they try to have a voice or individuate or be different, they're punished or ostracized or in some way treated in an unkind way or blamed for what happens to them. Um, and there's no commitment to nonviolence in an unhealthy and a low tech human relations family. You have verbal abuse, you have physical and sexual violence, often up to the point where sometimes people are killed. And if we take that model and we look at our country, then can we say, what kind of technology and human relations are we actually operating on? What are we legislating? How are we treating people? One of the hallmarks of a dysfunctional and abusive family is that those who are in a position of power are abusive in some way always justify the abuse. I slapped you because you talked back. I molested her because she wore that short skirt. They always blame the victim for what they do, and they are unable to feel empathy and remorse for the harm that they've caused other people. And there's a lot of that going on in our country today. And I say that because with the goal that we don't look at these things just like who to blame and who to hate, because that's what's causing the problem in the first place. I say that in my book, and we do this in our therapy offices, for the goal of healing. What does someone who's screaming and yelling at their children or hitting them, what do they need to come back into a safe relationship with their children? What wounds have they sustained that aren't healed, that they're just perpetuating in their present family? And how do we support them to heal rather than just hate them and blame them and want to lock them up and throw away the key? And I know that these are, I think for some people, this sounds Pollyanna-ish, like, well, it's just not going to happen. There's just bad people out there, or there's people who just deserve to be killed or whatever. But in the world of psychology, we really know that the worst behaviors,
and that's the cycle we try to stop.
I want to know what elements brew a dysfunctional family relationship. Is it the wrong environment, or is it music? It could be a lot of different things, but what brews the dysfunctionality in a family relationship?
Well, and what I'm looking at through the lens of psychology is both the microcosm and the macrocosm, because I think in the world we live in today, it's not an either or. So some of the dysfunction comes from intergenerational trauma that's never been healed. The parents were beaten when they were kids. People were screaming and yelling in their family, or their parents came home drunk and were passed out on the floor and didn't feed their children. And so what tools do they have to bring to their family? And again, that's not excusing anybody's bad behavior, but it's trying to understand it. So, and it could be more subtle than that. It could just be that you grew up in a family where your parents were depressed and they weren't available, and you were stuck alone in front of the TV and you weren't encouraged to have friends. That's poor conditioning and painful, a painful way to grow up as well. So it doesn't have to be super overt. It might be very subtle. It might just be that you never felt loved. It might be that you got a message that you were kind of stupid and fat and ugly, or you'll never amount to anything. But so those things can happen within a family, and they do, because I've worked with hundreds of people, and I cannot tell you the horrible things that people have sustained, from the people that they depend on and who even loved them, but didn't have good skills in bringing them up. But I think the reason why we have to look at it on the micro and the macro level is many people, not all people, but many people are getting those terrible messages and ways of being treated that are very harmful from the larger systems they live in. And I know this, people of color are discriminated against, and that's in the world around them. They may be loved in their home, but they may be followed by a policeman when they walk into a store. Or people are calling them names. Or I grew up Jewish, and I heard, comments about Jewish people that were very mean and hateful. So there's gender bias, there's injustice, there's very, I think, people suffering terribly from economic inequality and economic stress, and they bring that stress home to their families. Where does it come out? It comes out when you get home and you're stressed and you can't pay the bill, or you don't have enough food, or whatever it is, or your children are being bullied and you can't stop it. So it's really the microcosm and the macrocosmic families that we need to look at and address and try to heal. And again, not blame, but try to heal. How did we get into a family system in America where there's so much injustice, where there's so much discrimination, where economic inequality has become, just something that is a fact of life? How did we get there? What can we do?
You know, I haven't endured police discrimination, but I appreciate you bringing that up. That a lot of guys do, you know, African Americans do to get discriminated. But then again, a lot of people are doing wrong things, but
Right.
not, it's a 50-50 thing with me. But negative things, you know, negative thinking, how do people rebuild on negative thinking?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, a lot of us have learned negative thinkings. We've been taught to be judgmental, or we've been judged, and then we put that out into the world on other people. Or we've been taught that there's really not that much potential for us or possibility for us. And so we've resigned ourselves to a negative point of view about ourselves or the world we live in. And I think therapy, which is not available to everyone, and I realize that, really works very directly on the negative belief structure that people have absorbed and have come to believe. And so that's one of the things that's so great about psychology, good psychology, is that we know in the field of psychology that no one is born a loser. No one is born inferior. No one is born a sinner. We learn things, and things have happened to us that have definitely caused some people to go down a very destructive road, for sure. But the point of therapy is to uncover their beautiful, innocent, creative essence, and have that be what shines in the world, which is taking apart that negative belief structure. And I think we have to do that societally. I think we really have to look at the judgments we've passed on women, on people of color, on people of different sexual orientation, on people who are poor, on people who have disabilities, on people who have alternative lifestyles, whatever they are, that we're so quick to judge and condemn whole groups of people. And then they absorb that negativity from the society around them, even if they haven't gotten that in their homes. And so I think we just have to address this whole othering that we do in the world. And psychology is certainly a good way to approach that. Again, a lot of people don't have any access to therapy or that kind of a healing modality. And what I usually say to people is, one of the ways to work with that, that helps, I think, is to really look for people who are supportive. Look for places where your gifts are actually wanted. Maybe you're good with animals, so find a way to work with animals. Maybe you love nature, grow a garden. Maybe you love art, do your art, indulge in looking at other people's art. Find what lights you up, what really opens your heart and your mind to new ideas or a feeling of beauty or belonging, and go there and give it, like, not just look to take it in, but look to give it where you can, because I think so many of us just feel wonderful when our gifts are received.
Yeah. You know, I say mental health is another way that we have not painted our picture. Mental health people, I suffer from mental health. We haven't painted our picture, and with the right help, I believe that, like you, people like you can help let us create our own paintings and find those avenues, those
Right.
positive avenues to grow. What do you think about that?
I absolutely think that's true. And I think what's tragic is that we don't look at people as a society that way, that everyone is a beautiful human being who has something wonderful inside of them. And it doesn't have to be something that affects the whole world. You don't have to be a world leader. You don't have to clean up the whole environment. You don't have to have a cure for cancer. If you do, great, wonderful, if that's your contribution. But maybe you're just going to be a more loving parent, or you're going to cook wonderful meals for your friends, or you're going to go volunteer at an animal shelter, or you're going to, work on a community project of growing a garden for the community, whatever it is. That we start to look at people. And I think this is something that I really learned being both a client and a therapist, is that the more we look at each other as our beautiful selves, as our potential, as what's right with you instead of what's wrong with you, the more we encourage that to show up in the world.
How does positivity, even though I know the answer, but I need my audience to know, how does positivity change, a person's perspective on mental health, the negative part of mental health? Like, do you think that, and this is in conjunction, do you think that the way they have mental health set up now, how should mental health be set up now is the
Are you
question.
talking about therapy, or when you say mental health, what do you mean?
Well, they got mental health in hospitals. People go to hospitals, and a lot of people say that it's not good at these hospitals. They're still doing things that's like was in the
Oh,
1940s and 50s. What do you think should change about these hospitals?
well, I haven't worked in a hospital, so I can't speak directly to that. I've only
Mhm.
done private practice. So I may not have the best answer for a hospital setting, but what I would say as a general statement is you really want to hear a person's story. You want to let them tell their story without judgment, without shaming them, without blaming them, without you could have done it, why did you do that? But you really want to listen and hear their history and their story and believe them. When someone says, my parents were beating me, we believe them, you know. Or another good intervention in that line. So I used to work in an agency, and we did some group therapy. And there was a man in one of our groups who said, was talking about how physically abused he was as a child. And then he said, he followed his account of what had happened to him with, but I really deserved it. I was a really bad kid. And so there you kind of intervene and, lovingly say, nobody deserves that treatment. There's no child who deserves to be beaten. If you were doing something that was out of line, there are firm and loving ways to set limits with your children and hold a boundary that don't hurt them, that don't abuse them. So we have to, so you listen to a person's story, you believe them, and then you try to work with what they took on about themselves that was really untrue, that they've then adapted to. So let's just say he believes he's a bad person, he deserved it. So then when he goes out into the world, he finds himself, which is so often happens, attracted to people who think he's a bad person, and he's trying to please them the way he tried to please his parents. And he's recreating his history and going on believing he's a terrible person who doesn't deserve to have a good life. And so we help people take apart those negative beliefs. There is no bad person that's born. We become dysfunctional. Well, sometimes we become violent because of what we've learned and what's happened to us. But that's not who you are. You are not what happened to you, and you're not what you've done. And it can be taken apart, and you can heal, and you can stop doing some of the things that are dysfunctional in your life. Not because you're judged harshly, but because when a person has a chance to find that little child that was hurt inside of them, they begin to heal. They begin to feel empathy for that little child. I mean, I just can't tell you, and I went through this myself when I was in therapy. I didn't like the little girl that was in me. I didn't like her. I didn't think she was lovable. I didn't want to get anyone near her. And when I was in a safe place and I could really cry the tears for what happened to me, I could start to feel empathy for her and love for her and know that she did the best she could with what she had. And that if she had had different, she would have done even better. And so, basically what my experience is, when people have a chance to heal, when they have a chance to find the pain underneath their dysfunction and be believed and supported and seen in their best light and take apart that negative belief structure, they do become more positive. They become more positive about themselves. They become more positive about whatever the contribution is they can make in the world around them or to their relationships. And they want to be different in the world. They don't have to be forced to be different. They want to be different.
Do you think there should be more independent mental health for the people? Because, like I said, to revert back to hospitals, a lot of people go to hospitals and then get independent treatment. How do you think mental health should be for the future so that everybody that needs it can get it independently?
Well, I think that's a question that really speaks so powerfully to what I'm talking about looking at the larger family system of America. And this applies to probably many countries, but we'll just talk about America, which is, what are we doing with our tax dollars? What are we doing with our resources? Why aren't they being allocated to helping people get the mental health that they want and need, so that it would be affordable and accessible to every single person who wants it? It's not impossible to provide that. We just have to look at what our priorities are. Are our priorities building nuclear weapons? Are they arming more police? Or are they helping people so that they have a chance to heal, that they have a chance to thrive in this world and feel like they belong in a safe community that wants them? This is what a healthy family would do. It would take care of all of its family members.
So how do you think mental health is going to help a typical person with depression, anxiety, maybe bipolar? Like, how do you think counseling would help them? I know the answer. I just want you to say the answer because you're so smart.
Well, I'll say it this way. I didn't remember the things that happened to me when I was a little girl. I had buried them. And so I just really grew up feeling like I was unlovable and feeling like there was just something wrong with me and I didn't know what it was. And so I just tried to hide that. And I tried to look like I was okay. And I tried to compensate by being a good girl and being a really good student and doing well in school and not making any waves anywhere. And so it wasn't until, and I just coped the best I could. I mean, in some ways, I felt like I white knuckled my way through life because I just felt like I was the problem and I didn't know what the solution was. So it wasn't until I was an adult that I even heard about therapy. I mean, well, I heard about it when I was in college, but the connotation was, it was like, you shouldn't need that. You shouldn't, you should be able to fix yourself kind of. And I remember I went to one session with the school counselor when I was in college, and I don't remember what I said, but I never went back. I felt so vulnerable and so exposed, I couldn't bear it. So I didn't actually go to therapy until I was in my 30s, and I already had children. I was in a very dysfunctional marriage, and I had 3 little children.
Sorry to hear.
Yeah, well, it's a common story. So yeah, very common story. I repeated what I knew, like so many of us do unconsciously and not wanting to. And I went home from that first session. Oh, so the therapist asked me about my family, which you do, right? And I said my parents loved me. It was me. I'm the problem. And of course, she didn't buy that. And but I went home from that session. I went to the library because I'm the good student. I took out a book on psychology, and the first thing I read was the 10, and I don't remember what they all were now, but the 10 things that really impact a person's life severely and show up later on as dysfunction and depression or anxiety or, bad behavior or whatever. And I don't even remember what they were, but all of a sudden the light bulb went off, and I knew that I wasn't born this way. There were conditioning agents that made me feel this way. And I had already started to have some memories of what had happened to me by the time I went to therapy. So I began to realize, oh, what's going on with me is not a mystery. I wasn't born, a depressed person. I wasn't born anxious. And those were my 2 main symptoms, depression and anxiety, and a lot of shutdown, a lot of like not being able to have my voice. Something happened to me that made me feel the way I do about myself. And it really was mind-bogglingly opening. And then I went on a journey to process what had happened to me, and I had more memories, and I began to come out the other side because I was heard, I was believed, I got to cry my tears and have my pain. And, I want to say this for your audience because I've had so many people, I felt this way myself, and I've had so many clients come to me and say, I can't cry. I can't cry because I know that if I start, I will never stop. And I know what that feeling is like. And I want to say to people out there, it's not true. If you get a chance to cry your tears and have your pain in a safe place with a safe person, you will feel amazing relief, and you will begin to release some of what's been festering and causing inside of you and causing some of your dysfunctional coping mechanisms. It really can, and it's not the only part of therapy. Part of it, as we talked about before, is working with the negative belief structure that you took on. It's not true. But it's really important to be able to have your emotions in a safe place with a safe person. And many people don't have that in their life.
Yeah, I know that when, because crying is something that is healthy. When you cry, you are getting rid of all that thinking, that nasty thinking, and under your friend's supervision or other people that can encourage you. That's why we need friends that encourage you through it, through the rough patches. It will help, it will
Right.
really help, and it's healthy, like you said.
And many
So
people have been told as children, if you cry, I'll hit you more. So they were
yeah,
actually prevented from crying. It was dangerous to cry. And so you have to work
yeah.
through that inner injunction, right?
Yeah, you do. I was told that, by an uncle of mine, and that's why I always, I have some negative things about me that I'm working on today, and that needs to change, negative thinking. And everybody has negative thinking. It's just how you handle it and how much encouragement you need to withstand it.
Right.
What are your
And that you
thoughts?
start to, and just as you're saying, as you're working on it, that you start to learn new tools to help yourself. Like, in my younger years, if I had a negative thought, it just took me over. I was just run by it. I might
Yes.
wake up in the middle of the night and keep thinking it. And now I know, okay, I don't want to go there. What can I do for myself? Maybe I'm going to take a walk. Maybe I'm going to write in my journal. Maybe I'm going to think deliberately think a different thought, or try to remember something positive, or go be with somebody who I know is loving and caring. Like, you start to develop a tool chest so that you're not just the victim of what you've internalized over and over and over again.
One last question. How do you change those negative thinking skills, like that you've learned through other people placing them on you and your environment and stuff of that nature?
Well, I do think any healing process really does help diminish the power that those negative thoughts have over you. It doesn't mean you'll never have them again, but they don't have the same power. Like I was saying, when I was young, if I had a negative thought about myself, it just ran the show. That was it. I was off and running, and then I would look for evidence in my life to support the negative thought. So I think when you have a chance to heal, when you have a chance to do what you love, give what you love, be with people who are safe, who are supportive, even if it's one person, even if it's your dog, that you can, but really, I think some of the best therapy really does directly address that negative thinking, so that the goal is that it might show up, but you don't believe it anymore the way you did before. It doesn't have the hold on you that it did before, because one of the goals of the best healing work, whatever it is, whether it's psychotherapy or somatic therapy or body therapy or mediation, is that you can access the positive, that you can access your strengths and your gifts, and they become what you can turn to in yourself when you meet stressors in life. Because I still meet stressors in my life. I still, my family is still going through stuff. I have challenges. We all do. And there's challenges facing us in our country that impact all of us. But so you want to learn, you want to heal enough to have some skills to meet it with a powerful adult part of yourself, and not your triggered, wounded child who is, who just can't cope in a way that's helpful, not because they're bad, but because they're a child in you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, writing down what you've done and going back to it, if it's a negative thought, you write down that negative thought. I can't go to Toastmasters because, such and such, I'm nervous. And then you come back to that and say, how can I change that thought? And you say, well, I will go to Toastmasters because and break the habit of being anxious. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think if you have, I really do think that we're not meant to be islands. We need each other, and I think we live in a culture that still very highly prizes our so-called independence when we're really not independent. We need everybody to have food in the grocery store and gas in our cars and the computer that I'm talking to you on. We're very dependent, but we have this illusion that we're supposed to not need each other when we actually do. And so I think it's really important to have at least one person in your life that encourages you. For me, there's been hurdles that I've faced in my life of things that I'm afraid to do. And just having one person out there who says, Phyllis, you can do it. I know you can, helps me push through my own resistance. And then you internalize that. And then you have your own voice in your head. Phyllis, you can do this because you want to, and you're going to feel better when you get over your own resistance to what scares you.
Do you feel, I promise you this is the last question, but do you
Oh,
feel
I'm not,
like,
it's fine.
okay, do you feel like encouragement is lacking with people these days? Because it's like people feel like their family and their friends come, first, when that person that's homeless out on the street may need your encouragement. And we sometimes certain people will walk right past and say, well, all I care about is my friends and my family.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of self-focus, partly because I think we live in a fairly self-centered culture. I think that's the culture we live in, and that's kind of the norm. I think also people are really struggling to survive, and they feel like they can't help anybody else because they're barely helping themselves. And I also think that we're being conditioned to be kind of numb to the pain that's around us. And I think that's a very dangerous thing in the family of America, that it's just, that's them. And, we see all these images of bombed out cities and starving children and dead bodies. And we hear all these terrible tales of injustice, and it becomes mind-bogglingly numbing after a while. And I think we have a responsibility as the family of America. Yes, report the truth. Let's know what's really happening, but let's talk on social media and in the news about the solutions. Why are people homeless? They're not bad and stupid. They're not all mentally ill and unable to, they need resources. They need affordable housing. They need a living wage. They may need medical help. How are we going to, as the family of America, talk about the solutions and not just keep pointing fingers at the next person we think is the problem?
And how can the people reach you, Miss Leavitt?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on all the social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I have lots of videos on YouTube, but you can also contact me directly on my website, which is my name, phyllisleavitt.com. And please buy my book. If you're inspired to read more about what I'm talking about, it's called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing. And I love feedback from people. You can just contact me on my website and ask me a question or tell me your story. I love all interaction with other people. I love sharing. And you can also just write to me at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com. That's my business email address. So thank you for asking me.
You're welcome. Stay on the line. Everybody, thank you so much for joining my show. Take care, be safe, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Never waste my time, you are I want.